What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Buffalo Dash. As always, I'm Jason. He's Kieran. Our game against USC unfortunately got canceled at the last minute, but big ups on athletic director Rick George for getting in that San Diego State game. Probably a much-needed game. Definitely didn't want to go 3 weeks without playing a football game. As we all know, CU came out on top 20-10 in a very sloppy, ugly defensive win. Kieran, what are your thoughts? I mean, considering we finally saw a defense that played a full 4 quarters of football.
Yeah, man. So it was essential that our defense finally played a full 4 quarters of football, because this was sort of the game in some ways that we expected to see throughout the season, right at the beginning of the season, because San Diego State obviously had a fairly staunch defense, and that's definitely what kept them in the game. And then as a result, it meant that the Buffs had to step up big time, sort of on the defensive side of the ball. And I think that, and they delivered. It came down to the players that we expected to see deliver on the defensive side of the ball, both preseason through this season. We talked a lot last week, when we were planning on expecting to see them against USC, who's obviously a super highly, offensive, just really potent team on the offensive side of the ball, that we were expecting to have to see, Carson Wells and Nathan Landman, Mustafa Johnson, and the rest of them step up big time. And obviously Nathan Landman, had an absolutely enormous game, several sacks, National Defensive Player of the Week, which is just, a huge feather in Landman's cap, especially playing, in the Pac-12 and stuff. And so, I think that they delivered in the way that we expected to see was going to be likely, given the Neuer's newness to being on the starting, being the starting quarterback and things like that, and our younger sort of wide receiver core and things like that. But it was just all around great defensive play. But how about yourself? Anything stick out?
The offense fell back to earth, most definitely. We knew they couldn't keep up this kind of production. We definitely saw what they're capable of. In this game especially, we saw that defensively they can win games, solely based off of their defensive effort. Like you said, key players that we said last week who were going to have a huge impact on a USC game had a huge impact on an SDSU game, no matter who the opponent is. Nate Landman, monstrous game. The fact that the CU defense held the passing yards under 100, the rushing yards under 100, and the receiving yards under 100, that's pretty dang good. No matter who you're playing, that kind of thing, for a defense in college to hold anybody under 100 yards in any of the skill positions is quite impressive. I think on the offensive side, they definitely show that they can dictate games and go the pace they want to. Considering that offense was out there, it's got to be at least 3 quarters of the game, just because the defense on Colorado's side was doing what they needed. I thought the pick 6 was due to Neuer's, still newness at that quarterback position. When that play was happening, I was like, oh, that's a pick 6. Defender jumped the route. Nothing Neuer could do about it. And that's something he'll go back and film and say, yeah, you kind of got to look elsewhere. And that's definitely a throw that I cannot make next time and save myself all that trouble. That being said, let's see. Broussard had another great night, 124 rushing yards. That offensive line, even though we're without Purcell, still is excelling in protecting Neuer and creating gaps for the running backs. The only thing I noticed was the snaps were a little all over the place. That obviously has to do with not having your number one center. And that's what you're going to expect, that kind of thing. But that's something that can be ratified this week in practice. But overall, like you said, this is the type of game that we expected at the beginning of the season, and Colorado showed that they can hold teams' offenses to only 3 points. And that's a really big achievement going into the final 2 games of the season.
Yeah, so I totally agree. And I think that while we saw that pick six from Neuer, which is, I feel like that was an inevitability.
Yeah.
He managed to play super safe the first couple of games of the season, and he was inevitably going to have an errant mistake like that. Fortunately, it came against the San Diego State team that, while they had a very strong defense, did not have a super strong offense, and were literally creating all of their offense with their defense. Their only touchdown they scored was on that pick six.
Yeah.
And so I think that while that was an inevitability, one thing I did like to see is the way that Neuer was spreading the ball around from a passing perspective, right? So obviously, Jarek Broussard had an enormous game, 134 rushing yards. The kid's becoming an absolute staple in the Colorado offense. But Neuer managed to get passes off, to Levante Chenault, Katie Nixon, Brendan Rice, Jarek Broussard, Dimitri Stanley, Jalen Jackson. So it was the kind of thing where he was distributing the ball amongst sort of all the receivers quite equally, which managed to also highlight the fact that CU, one thing that we hadn't really talked about, and to be honest, it's partially because we hadn't really seen it, is they've got a super strong wide receiver core, a super diverse wide receiver core. And it goes beyond just Katie Nixon, who we knew was going to be a staple player. It's great to see him back and stuff. But on the other hand, we had the likes of Levante Chenault, 64 yards receiving. Katie had only 26. But there was no player that while there's no player that stood out much more than the rest of the receiving core, we saw good sort of spreading the ball out amongst all of them, which was a good indicator for the fact that we just have 6-7 weapons that are all perfectly capable of stepping up when they need to be on this CU wide receiving team.
Yeah. That was probably my next point, is that this very underrated wide receiving core. It's definitely showing that they don't have to rely on Katie Nixon. Even more like that, someone like a Chenault, who's a freshman, who made some really big catches in that game on those long third down plays that you really wouldn't expect a freshman to make. And it's really it instills a lot of confidence in me that while they're going to lose Katie Nixon next year, they still have Chenault, they still have Brendan Rice, they still have Demetrius Stanley next year. They'll get Brady Russell back, who they definitely missed in that game. It showed in those red zone possessions that they needed a big guy down there to get it to. But I like the confidence that they're giving me, and I also like how while they shied away from the conservative offense they were playing with through Neuer, they definitely let him open it up a little bit and take some more shots downfield. And while I wouldn't say it was overly successful, it definitely had its pros and its cons. I definitely think there was some questionable play calling, and I definitely think they need to feed Broussard the ball more in certain situations, because I just don't think that while Neuer has shown that he can be really good, he hasn't shown that he can be great yet. Yeah. And they found a great running back who has the capability of having 200 plus yards on the ground per game. So it's definitely something that they kind of need to figure out. But I do like that they're starting to instill more trust in Neuer with the ball and his decision making to throw more than 10 or 15 yards downfield.
Yeah, it was that. Absolutely, it was great. It was great to see. While the longest pass that I think Neuer had was 18 yards to Vontae. Yeah. It's good to just see that they're that they're not forcing it, right? They're slowly just they started with just running the ball and relying sort of mostly exclusively on the run game in that first game against UCLA and largely on the run game against Stanford. And then to see them start to kind of slowly be working into that pass offense, right? So they're slowly starting to they're spreading the ball out amongst these, various very capable, very talented wide receivers. And then from there, I think we can expect to see them start to stretch the field a little bit more.
Mhm.
But again, it's sort of like it's this very sort of clear, intentional progression. I feel like from Darren Cheverini and Carl Durrell to, it's a baby step sort of thing, right? You know what I mean? It's that they know that Neuer, it's his first rodeo, and so they're taking the right steps, I think, in terms of easing him into stretching the field in, sort of more exciting ways. And then I think, by come season end, I think we can expect to start to see him really start stretching the field a lot with the likes of a Katie Nixon or Demetrius Stanley, Levante Chanel.
Yeah, definitely a lot of pros and cons to take away from it. With that USC game cancellation, CU is put into this sticky situation. So essentially, CU's path to a Pac-12 South title is more or less non-existent. Essentially, what needs to happen is if both USC and CU went out, the tiebreakers would go by head-to-head, which isn't possible because I doubt that game's going to be made up. Common opponents, well, we have U of A and Utah next. USC beat both Utah and U of A. So then it'd go to the college football playoff rankings, which I'll get to this point a little bit, which USC is currently ranked in and most likely will end ranked higher than us, assuming we win out. I feel like CU's kind of getting screwed over here. Like, the fact that USC moved up in the AP poll this week is kind of dumbfounding to me, considering they haven't played a football game in 2 weeks. And the fact that their opponents are combined, I think now 0-7 that they've beaten. So it's like, at what point it's like, I'm not going to say USC's been overrated, but it seems like CU is definitely getting the short end of the stick here.
I mean, I agree. So I think that definitely what's going on here, I think there's definitely a name brand factor going on here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, from the beginning of the season, I mean, there's genuine reason to believe that USC could bring a really potent offense to each game because of Keaton Slovis and their wide receiving core and stuff. And, USC is just is perennially one of the best teams, if not the best team in the Pac-12. And as, the same goes for Oregon. And as a result, I mean, we've seen them as the only two ranked Pac-12 teams thus far. I think though that things have definitely fallen, unfortunately, for the Buffs in terms of certain games being, canceled for our opponents as well as for us, and not being able to play that head-to-head USC game is absolutely in USC's favor. I mean, yeah. I found myself feeling like, and I certainly don't think this is legitimately the case, but feeling like it was, CU's been on this roll, and USC had a lot more to lose in that game than we did. They've been rolling, while they're 3-0, I mean, they've been eking out wins. They nearly lost to U of A. They haven't had any pretty wins so far. And meanwhile, CU's been kind of consistently, having just good, solid games against our opponents. And by not playing us, only CU's really the only team that had anything to lose there. And so there's definitely, in terms of, as you were saying, with the AP rankings and stuff like that, sort of being what could very likely be the ultimate deciding factor, assuming that the Buffs are able to win out against Utah and Arizona, or, at the very least hopefully play both of those games, is that, you are sort of getting this aspect of USC has the name that people, when they think Pac-12, are going to look for in terms of how they're doing this year. Oregon as well, and then maybe Washington. But those are like the three that, sort of come to mind for everyone, and are really the only teams that are getting any sort of real attention, despite the fact that CU, just as I would say just as deservingly 3-0 as USC is right now. And I've seen nothing from USC that has really differentiated them so much more. It's not like they've played so much more so much tougher opponents or anything like that, and they've just managed to eke out wins, if anything, in a less sort of definitive way than the Buffs have. And so I think that the Buffs are really struggling there. But I mean, what are your thoughts?
Like I said, there's no doubt that CU got the short end of the stick. That the cancellation of the USC game only hurt CU. And it's just unfortunate that like you said, like the name brand that USC is, there's no doubt that they're a top three team in the Pac-12. But I think we're right. We're a solid number 4, possibly vying for a top 3 spot. And like you said, I haven't seen anything from USC that's overly impressed me. They struggled against Arizona State. Granted, is a good team who has just been ravaged by the virus, and we haven't really got to see much more of besides that USC game. They struggled against Arizona, who we thought was going to be a good team, and then gets blown out by Washington. They decisively beat a Utah team who was the first game of the year. And you really can't say anything from that kind of game. And it's like, if we march into Arizona and don't want to say blow them out, but we win in a more convincing fashion than USC did, and we beat Utah at home in the same fashion, it's like, well, how can you make the argument that USC is a better team than CU? Because they're ranked? Well, that's just because CU doesn't get the recognition it deserves. Finally, Nate Landman was, like we said, got the National Defensive Player of the Week, but it's like, for a team who had been written off in the beginning of the season like CU has, and has come all this way to, on such short notice, a new coach, didn't get to practice, didn't get to learn his system, to come out and become 3-0 and win, that UCLA game has now become a really good win after they beat Arizona and played a really good Oregon team super close. We beat a good UCLA team. We beat a Stanford team that technically had their number 1 quarterback at the helm. And you can say for all you want that, he's coming back from injury, or he's coming back from the virus, but he was healthy to play. And we beat a San Diego State team who had gone 5-0 in their last meetings with Pac-12 opponents. So it's like, how can you tell me that USC is a better team than CU because they're nationally ranked in the AP poll, and that they're ranked in the high teens and in the college football playoff rankings? It's like, no, they aren't. And if CU wins out and USC wins out and USC ends up going to the Pac-12 title, as a Colorado fan, I'm pissed. But it's like, USC didn't win that title convincingly. Hey, if we went into the Coliseum and lost and they held the advantage, fine. That's totally fine. They're the better team than us. You have all the right to say that. But until you beat us, and until you show that you can convincingly win games, and if they lose to Washington State, that then gives us the inside track. Obviously we need to win out and that kind of thing. So all the pressure is on them while it is on us. But it's like, at this point, you can't convincingly say that USC is a better team than CU.
So I agree. I think that the only thing that CU Buffs fans can do at this point is pray for them to lose their last game against UCLA. So they've got Washington State next week, and then UCLA to follow. And at this point, in addition to the Buffs winning out, that's all we can really hope for. Because even if they were to say lose to UCLA, and we also then lose though to one of either Utah or Arizona, then we're sort of back in that 50-50 position where we're looking at the AP poll. And so in order to eliminate the AP poll from things, that's what CU fans have to hope for, is a CU winning out and USC losing to, the in-city rival. And so I think that for the Buffs to really make a name for themselves, though, while I totally agree with all of the things that you just said, right, is like, at this point, all we can do in terms of making sure that we're known, and that, this team that was given the second longest odds in the entire conference to win the Pac-12 and is top 3, 4. I mean, it's kind of hard to properly rank the teams within the conference right now, but it's certain. I mean, we're undefeated and certainly top 2 in the South, and therefore you could say top 3 or 4. It's the kind of thing that all we can ask out of the Buffs at this point is to win out, both in the season, and then if we manage to get a loss out of USC, then get into the Pac-12 championship, win the Pac-12 championship, and just prove that like this is a new, this is a whole new deal, right? Like the Durrell and the new sort of CU football culture it's different than what people have previously thought of when they think of CU football, and it's like just a completely different like game plan day in and day out, and it's a game plan that is super super successful with what is from a recruiting perspective not by any means, and so I think that I think that while it's not necessarily the fairest way, that's the only way that CU can really truly earn the credit that they deserve. Because I totally agree with you that it's remarkable that we're even 3-0 already this season. And then, if we're able to just continue playing the kind of, brand of football we've been playing, I would expect CU to be able to win out and potentially. And then, that leaves us in a great position to sort of reconsider our standing in the Pac-12 potentially. But so that leads us right into our next point though, right? Which is that can they win out, right? Because because that's what we're left with. That's the only that's the only really option that CU fans can really rely on. We've got games against Arizona and Utah left.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the real odds are of the Buffs being able to win out against this University of Arizona team that obviously put up a good fight against USC and was had the longest odds to win the Pac-12, and then this Utah team that they missed their first two games in the season, and so they've been a little bit tough to read, I think, in some ways.
I give them 60% chance. Colorado's playing great football. There's no doubt about it. And if Colorado wants to be in, like we said, in this conversation come the end of the season to at least have a shot at the Pac-12 South title, they need to win out. I think while Arizona played USC tough, I think their game against Washington where they got blown out, and their game against Arizona where they when they were convincingly beat by UCLA definitely showed that this is not the Arizona team I expected us to be playing. So I definitely think going in there, we have a good shot at beating them and just giving us that chance. I think it's going to come down to the Utah game. I said from the beginning of the season, obviously this was before we knew the Buffs would be at this point in the season, that they had the opportunity to really, really be up there and contend, that this was the game that CU was going to win no matter what. And now at this point, I have even more confidence in this team, especially a Utah team that has played two games who, they did play tough opponents in USC and Washington. They blew the lead to Washington. They had that game wrapped up, and they lost convincingly to a USC team who, like we said, hasn't shown us that they're the USC team of this greatness. So I think I give the Buffs a really good chance to win out. I think very winnable game at Arizona, and I think that Utah game is going to be gritty. It's going to be a close game, but I think CU comes out on top. They win out. Listen, at this point, we have 3 wins. We're bowl eligible. That's more than anybody could have told us at the beginning of the season, and I think that's a success for this season. But like Carl said in his post game after the game, when someone said that, hey, you guys are bowl eligible, it's like, well, that doesn't really matter. We still have 2 more games to play. We still have the rest of the season to play. And I really think the way they're playing, they have a good chance at winning out. And I think they have 2 favorable games coming up to really set themselves up to do so.
I agree. I mean, so Carl Durrell's attitude with it all. I mean, Carl Durrell's he's more favorable in my eyes every single day I hear him, right? Because it's the kind of thing he clearly just has. He's got this low key demeanor where he's just, he's talking to the press and he's a low key guy, and then he's just always, but his expectation, he's clearly earned the respect of these players, right? Because his expectation for, just coming in, even just out of his first year, is so much higher than I think what CU fans have relegated themselves to being willing to expect from a CU football team, right? And this is a guy who was at CAU, several years ago. He's been in the Pac-12 for a long time, right? I mean, just as a player, as a head coach at UCLA, then, as an assistant coach later on at CU, and then, he's been out of the Pac-12 for a while. When he was the head coach at UCLA, when he was a player at UCLA, I mean, that was when CU was like a dominant force, right? So he comes in here, and he thinks of CU as being that team that, he's brought that mentality to coming here, right? It's like, CU is like this team that is always competing for a Pac-12 championship, and if not more, right? And I think that players have clearly bought into that. I mean, we don't have a whole lot of inside looks into that because of how coronavirus limits all this sort of behind the scenes footage that we normally get on Instagram and things like that. But
yeah,
I'm sold on the guy, and as you talked about, and or sort of brought up in the beginning of the season, right? The opportunity for this Utah rivalry, this sort of Rocky Mountain rivalry, if you will, between Utah and CU, North South in the Pac-12. I think it's really interesting that we're going to end up having Utah as our last game to potentially be the deciding factor. There's going to be a lot on the line for the Buffs when they play Utah in a nationally televised game that last week and stuff. And so, obviously, first things first, it's like, let's focus on Arizona in the short term and get that win under our belts before we start, getting too far ahead. But, just to follow the trend, which has been them just getting good, gritty wins out. Like, I think having Utah be that last game on the schedule that could be what decides whether CU has a chance at competing for a Pac-12 championship again, going, for the first time since 2016 and under a first-year coach and a first-year quarterback and a young team. That would be that. Nothing would make me happier than to just at least be able to compete for that, because if anything, this season's proven that, we had Oregon State play Oregon this weekend, and Oregon State stunned Oregon. It's like anything is possible. Anything's possible. See, you could go in there and let's say they get Oregon as their the matchup from the northern side of the ball. It's like they could win that game. I have trust in them. So it's CU's just rolling with the punches in the best way possible, honestly, and the way that they've sort of just taking this like week by week, down by down, run the ball. Like, I don't care. It just has to we just have to get the lead and maintain it. And whether if that's a defensive heavy game or what, I don't know. I'm into it, man. I'm into it.
Yeah. I want CU to get the respect they deserve at this point. I still think they're getting disrespected by the Pac-12. At this point, CU has proven that they can beat quality opponents in UCLA, take advantage when they're playing the lesser opponent in Stanford, and beat a non-conference team who's gone 5-0 against a Pac-12 in the past, who has a very staunch defense. And while they didn't have the offense that they expected to, still beat a non-conference opponent who's projected to be in the top of their conference. And to still say that CU is not a top team in the Pac-12 right now, it's dumbfounding. It's like, how do you continue to say that this team doesn't deserve the respect that you're not giving it? And it's like, at what point you just say, hey, this team has earned the respect that they deserve and has earned the fact that the Pac-12 needs to recognize that this team is for real this year, even though no one thought they were. They're for real. It's time to get that point across. And like you said, I love that the Utah game actually has a lot of significance now. Obviously, CU needs to get into Arizona, get the win, get out of there, and focus on Utah. But the fact that the Pac-12 gets a game where, while Utah may not be part of it, that CU has all this on the line, and the fact that it's a mountain rivalry and it's going to be Folsom Friday night nationally televised, it's like, man, that just kind of gets me going. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself because you really can't take this Arizona team for granted. But the fact that we're in this position to do such a thing is really exciting.
Yeah, and it would obviously, it would upset so many odds, considering the fact that, I'll keep going back to it over and over and over, no matter how much, because it's like, as you said, we're bowl eligible, right? We could end up in a super solid bowl game at this point, however a bowl game may look, given, this absolutely unprecedented season. But we could find ourselves in a really strong bowl game because of the fact that we have had such a successful season so far, and we started out as the second longest odds to win the Pac-12.
Yep. I'm very excited to see what happens. Obviously, you need to focus this week on Arizona, and then possibly set up that really intriguing matchup coming on Saturday. With that, thank you guys all so much for coming out to another episode of Buffalo Dash. If you want to follow us on Twitter handles are under our beautiful faces. If you want to follow Dash Sports on social media, follow us on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Check us out on YouTube at Dashboards TV. Check out our website, dashboards.tv, and check out Sports Pac-12. Super cool, awesome. That was like 3 adjectives I didn't need right there. Super cool Pac-12 website. Posts a lot of good content, Pac-12 only. It's really awesome. This Friday, expect Kieran Murphy to be with one of our Arizona Buff Dash co-host affiliates for the crossover show coming up. But with that, we will see you both next Monday. Expecting Colorado win and setting up, like we said, a really intriguing matchup with Utah. But with that, we'll see you all later. And as always, go Buffs.